Guys, welcome back to another episode of A2 the show. Today we have Professor Dr. Makram Rabah. Dr. Makram Rabah has been part of Quantum since 2007. He's currently the lead consultant there and main researcher and analyst on a number of projects for the Middle East. He is a graduate of the American University of Beirut with his bachelor's and master's in history and has also done his PhD at Georgetown University. Mr. Dr. Rabah also has a law degree from the Lebanese University, and he is a lecturer of history at AUB and LAU. His research interests include modern Middle East, modern history of Lebanon, and the Lebanese Civil War, and the role of memory in the reconciliation process. He's also an author of the groundbreaking book entitled A Campus at War, Student Politics at the American University of Beirut from 1967 to 1975. He is also a regular contributor to a number of regional and international publications on Middle Eastern political affairs. Dr. Rabah, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Um, Dr. Rabah, we're all Lebanese here. We all know what's going on in Lebanon. It's a tough period for our country, and so maybe want to start off by asking, how is it going from your perspective? Because you live in Beirut. You're experiencing this firsthand. What's going through your head
Well,
and around you?
genuinely, I'm very concerned. I am one of many who have been shouting my lungs off since the last perhaps maybe 15 years that if we do not do anything about Iran controlling Lebanon, we will get to where we are right now. I would be lying to you if I say I was surprised by what's happening. I'm always surprised by the level of criminality that Iran and its militias have, as well as how Israel has perfected killing. But I'm not surprised that such a system, such a sectarian system, which supposedly claims it harbors and it fosters diversity, can actually be used against the people of Lebanon. Because at the end of the day, when you have a militia like Hezbollah, who have turned into the strategic consultants of terror, and ironically, the reason why Hezbollah are good at what they do is because they're Lebanese. They've taken advantage of the educational system, the diverse system which I talked about. I am very much concerned that after the war, if Hezbollah is to remain as is, meaning that it will continue to claim that the only way for prosperity is violence, I think that Lebanon is at risk of fading away. If not fading away, it will become something different, which for me would be one of the most tragic events of the last 100 years or so.
Can you expand on that a bit? What do you mean by Lebanon will fade away? What does that future potentially could look like?
Well, I was really concerned when the Israelis opened their embassy in Abu Dhabi. Their foreign minister at the time gave a very ominous comment. He said Lebanon was a country with a militia, now it's a militia with a country. So if the Shiites who support Hezbollah continue to give Hezbollah a kind of cover, and it tries to normalize Hezbollah under any form or pretext, the international community as well as the Arab world around us will simply isolate Lebanon. And Lebanon cannot survive uh, without the region, simply because our economy is based on a diaspora. We have here Said, all of you are living abroad.
Mm-hmm.
If I if I do have the option of living abroad, but I decided to stay. So if we are to sever these relations between the Lebanese and the diaspora, Lebanon's economy will be no more. So you can't feed your kids pride and resistance and all of this crap, right? So you need a real economy. And the problem is, Lebanese for the long period of time were too lazy to clean their own house. What the Israelis are doing right now is actually a catastrophe because they don't really care about Lebanon. Some people in Lebanon actually think that they are doing this for us. The Israelis have been looking for a Dawn pilot for the last 40 years. Ron Arad, who was shot down and most probably killed, they're still looking for for his bones.
Oof.
We have yet to bring people to justice for the August 4 port bombing, which
Mm-hmm.
is ridiculous. As you mentioned, I studied law. My dad is a Supreme Court judge, retired. I grew up around the idea that one has to abide by the laws, not because you have to, but this is what good people do. We no longer have these institutions that can preserve Lebanon. And all of the golden age, which we once talked about, can no longer be restored. Actually, people copied us. Dubai copied us, Riyadh copied us, the rest of the region copied us. Syria is on the right track. It has a lot of challenges. Even the people living in Palestine are much better than we're living because simply they know that no one can liberate them except themselves. We have been fed this crap about resilience. Resilience doesn't include a drone flying over your home 24/7. Resilience doesn't include allowing a
Yeah.
rat belonging to the Iranian Revolutionary Guard to hide in your building and to be used as a human shield. This is in no way trying to justify what the Israelis are doing, because according to people who attack me, I try to find a reason. There is a reason why this war is happening. It did not happen because the Lebanese parliament convened and decided to go to war against the Israelis. It's because someone living in a dungeon decided to unleash 6 rockets at Israel in revenge of Ali Khamenei. I don't care about Ali Khamenei, especially that he has killed his own people. So why would I allow for the Lebanese South to be destroyed just to try to avenge Ali Khamenei? And obviously they didn't. If they actually were able to avenge him, I would actually indulge them in a kind of a hallucination, political hallucination. What's happening right now is just to call it a tragedy would be an understatement.
Okay.
So
Go ahead, Said.
I just wanted to talk a bit more about the rockets that were launched at Israel from Hezbollah. They launched only 6 rockets, and you're calling the person like just someone from the dungeon was launching these rockets. So this was just some random person that is a Hezbollah operative or member that launched these rockets, or was it actually
My
something that was, like an order?
the information I was able to get from my sources indicated that actually the Secretary General of Hezbollah, who's a wimp, sorry to use this, only saw these rockets on TV like us, because the guy who gave the order to the field commander who was having tea right after iftar was a
Mm.
member of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. And
Oof.
ironically, the Hezbollah proper wanted to issue a statement saying that it was not them and to blame some Sunni shady organization. And then they realized that Iran decided to throw us into hell. So basically, I am not accusing them of being Iranians. They are Iranians. They are pursuing the interest of the Iranian Guards, and they have done so over and over. And if you don't believe me, because I oppose Hezbollah, the late Secretary General of Hezbollah has said this over and over. And more importantly, Saeed, people keep on insisting that Hezbollah is a resistance movement. As a
Mhm.
historian, anyone who will indulge me in reading the manifesto of Hezbollah that was announced in 1985, February 1985, it clearly says that they want to establish an Islamic State. The reason why they shifted into quote unquote resistance is because the late Hafez al-Assad forced them to do so. They were using this as a kind of a cover or as a kind of what we call framing. And again, if you don't believe me, look up Imad Maghniyi, the terrorist leader of Hezbollah, that actually said this in one of his lectures, that we are a movement. Resistance for us is only a phase, and whatever happens, they cannot take away our guns.
No, yeah, that's right. That is written in the manifesto. I remember reading it when I was doing my master's. And also, one other thing that they also claimed was the the removal of the Zionist regime. They wanted
And
to.
and their crusader allies in Lebanon. That's what they call the Lebanese Republic. And to be
Mhm.
fair, none of Hezbollah's secretary generals actually acknowledged the Ta'if agreement. For them, this is something that they never actually accepted the legitimacy of the state. And that's why they were very good allies of the Free Patriotic Movement and Michel Aoun, who lost his position because of the Ta'if agreement.
That's true. So, what we're from what I'm understanding from you is that Hezbollah isn't actually coordinated anymore. Their communication has been severed since the loss of their leaders.
There's something called command and control. So if you are to run an operation, let's say now we have a delivery service, I need to talk to my drivers, right? If I can't talk to them, I lose control of them. So right after the pagers and after the walkie-talkie attack and all of this, they were very scared to use technology, so they had to shift. And more importantly, remember, Lebanon is a small country. We're 4 million. If we are to assume that the Shiites of Lebanon are 1 million, which is an over-exaggeration, and the Hezbollah operatives are 1% of this, take a look at the death counter. These people lost a lot of people. And again, if you're a terrorist raid by Hezbollah, you cannot go to West Point or go do a workshop. You are actually trained from the killing fields of Syria and Yemen and Iraq. So they were never able to replenish their guys, their fighters. That's why what happened is when the Speaker of Parliament, Qalibaf, flew his plane to Beirut, he brought money and he brought officers with him. These junior officers from the IRGC are now running Hezbollah. That's why when someone doesn't know Bint Jbeil, he has no problem shooting rockets right next to a kindergarten. Brahim A'il, the leader of the Ridwan Brigade, supposedly one of the elite groups of Hezbollah, when he was targeted, he decided to convene all of his men right next to a daycare site. This is I would never, ever understand how these people operate. When I travel with my family, we don't all go in one plane. How could this guy who claims to be fighting Israel do this? How can you convene the entirety of your command structure in one basement? This is why incompetence is very dangerous, especially when this incompetence is used to service Iran, because we are paying the price of that.
So, but the question that we were looking at was, with the information that is at hand, is Hezbollah as strong as it was in 2006? Because we want to assess and understand because obviously right now they're at war and conflict with Israel on the borders, and Israel is challenging the south, and they're pushing into, they're taking lands in the south. So what's their strength right now?
My bubblegum wrapper answer to you is no, they're not as strong as 2006, simply because in 2006 we were dealing with a different Hezbollah. First of all, Hezbollah took advantage of an economy and of a state that was constructed by the late, great Rafi al-Hariri. Remember that we exited the war, we had no economic problems whatsoever. And more importantly, we had Saudi Arabia and Qatar and the entirety of the international community rushing to our aid. More importantly, Hezbollah at that particular moment were still fighting as a guerrilla movement. They were small cells that were able to get the Israelis into Lebanon, and they were able to use anti-armor weapons somewhat effectively. Hezbollah, since 2011, decided to go fight in Syria and in Yemen and all of this. Hezbollah now operates and has a central kitchen. Before, they used to live for 4 or 5 days eating a bar of chocolate or living off simple food. This is no minor detail. More importantly, because they were so happy killing the innocent Syrians and taking pictures and uploading them on social media, the Israelis now know everyone in Hezbollah. And more importantly, Israel, since 2006, did something called the Vinograd Report. This was a kind of a study of the war. And in 1982, after the invasion, they did something called the Kahan Report. For our audience, Kahan and Vinograd are the Supreme Court, the Chief Justice of Israel. The Israelis tend to re-examine their military adventures through the judiciary. And the army actually reads reports. They write reports and they read them. So they actually learned that their fight in Lebanon was different, and they had to adjust to it. And what you're seeing around us is a perfect example. The pager attack was not a technology breakthrough. The pager attack was the ABC of espionage and proper intelligence. These people, starting 2011, stopped thinking about fighting Israel. They transformed, and I use this as very accurately, they are strategic consultants of terror. They go with their laptops to the Houthis. They teach them how to fight. They weaponize. I'm very famous in Lebanon for calling Hezbollah's drones wedding drones, which is technically true. They go and they buy civilian components and they weaponize them, and that's not. I'm not exaggerating here. So again, if you are trying to fight a country that manufactures softwares like Israel, you cannot go buy a pirated software from AliExpress, right? It doesn't work like that. And these criticism and these sarcastic remarks is to remind everyone that if you decide to wager on such people, your killing will not only be justified by the Israelis. No one will care what will happen to you. That's why I'm really worried about the post-war ramifications, not really the war itself.
What are you worried about the post-war ramifications? Because how are we supposed to take out the Iranian element from it without major infighting?
Well, first of all, you start off by dropping the narrative that Hezbollah has forced into the people. This is the first time in human history, Ali, that a resistance movement, quote unquote, invites occupation.
Right.
Before,
They're
before
supposed to be
October 7th.
anti-imperialist, right? So
And second, my problem is not with people who are, they claim, and when you hear them talk, once I was on TV with this guy, he told me they killed our Pope, Ali Khamenei. I told him, hell no.
yeah,
Hell no. First of all, the Shiites of Lebanon do not emulate Ali Khamenei. Second, the last time a Pope was asking for violence and blood was during the Crusades.
yeah.
So I will not allow you to force your religious vision on the Shiites of Lebanon, on the Lebanese in general. Second, and more importantly, if you want to avenge Ali Khamenei, you go after the people that killed him. You don't go after us that we're trying to tell you do not commit suicide on our behalf. More importantly, my major problem is that after the war, if the President of the Republic continues to talk to the Shiites through the medium of Harakat Amal and Hezbollah as subjects of these two parties, he is actually condemning them to death. That's why you have to talk to the Shiites as for Lebanese. And you have to remind them that the reason why we are taking care of you is not because you are Shiites. You are Lebanese first and foremost. And again, in order to go back home, there's only one way out of this quagmire: total disarmament of Hezbollah. And this doesn't happen through street fighting and through a full-scale war. No. First of all, you have to debunk the whole myth of resistance. If you can get what you want with honey, you don't use vinegar. Right? So if you use it, you use archaic North Korean / Iranian weapons, and they don't work, and you can get what you want from diplomacy, I would definitely wager on diplomacy rather than wagering on someone who buys his electronics from the Mossad.
100%.
So, out of curiosity, well, we're talking about the debunking the resistance concept, and so after obviously the occupation has left back in 2000, Hezbollah is still using the concept of resistance as in their political agenda and their propaganda, and they're constantly saying like they have to have their weapons so that they can continue their resistance. On what basis are they placing that concept of they are a resistance force if there is no occupation at that time?
Again, remember that they are working within a toxic political environment that actually would manufacture something like Hezbollah if Hezbollah did not exist. Nabih Birri, Wali Jumlat, even people who are pro-sovereign like Jaja, which I like and respect, use the system itself. They still believe that the system itself can protect diversity. Nabih Birri wants to use Hezbollah as muscle in a way. And that's a problem. Hezbollah, this is what people call the nexus between the mafia and the militia. So you need an enforcer, you need the godfather who will eat spaghetti and meatballs, and you need someone who is willing to pull the trigger. That's why if they don't use Hezbollah to kill you, they can try to use the judiciary or the security apparatus. They try to do this at least 4 times. Every time I get summoned, I actually The paper that they sent to me, I frame it and I put it in my office. They can't get to me for a number of reasons. First of all, I studied law. Second, I'm really loud. And more importantly, these people are cowards. When you take them on and when you know your rights, you can actually win. However, if they can get to you like they did with my good friend Luqman Slim, they can gun you down in the south of Lebanon, and the judiciary would not do anything about it. That's real tragedy here.
So, and why does Hezbollah just allow itself to be used as in that apparatus by Nabi Berri or any of the other political
Because
groups?
these are the people that Hezbollah does this. Hezbollah uses Coptagon and uses drugs. The end justify the means. They use this because these people are their first line of defense. These people are, every time you try to pass any legislation that would limit Hezbollah's black market or shadow economy, you have Nabi Berri and his gang using, again, remember, Lebanon has been, sometimes our presidency were vacant for 3 years just because Hezbollah could not force their will on the people. And more importantly, Hezbollah did something really, really dangerous. They isolated Lebanon vis-a-vis the international community and the Gulf by capitalizing on a $5 billion drug economy. They turned Lebanon to a narco state before the collapse of the Assad regime. So we were not able, as Lebanese farmers, to send vegetables and fruits to the Gulf, and this was a $250 million money-making machine. So these poor, quote-unquote, some of them Shiites from the Biqa, had to rely heavily on the clientelist system. And more importantly, perhaps the largest farce in history is that we grew up with the idea that Hezbollah are not corrupt. Hezbollah are corrupt, but they cash their money through the ATM called Nabi Berri. He is their access point to the Lebanese government. And the perfect example of this is when the economy collapsed, all of their social welfare institutions collapsed with it.
So mainly they're just a money laundering scheme that's being filtered through the government systems and the social
I
welfare.
invite our audience to Google Operation Cassandra, which is a DEA investigation into the drug and money laundering operation of Hezbollah. Ironically, Barack Obama tried to squash this investigation because he was so much adamant on signing the 2015 nuclear deal. So he wanted us to believe that Ferdowsi and Omar al-Khayyam and all of these great poets and Persian artists are the same as this killer called Qasim Soleimani. They tried to push these murderers on us, these baby killers. The barrel bomb dropping baby killers were what the Americans gave us. And if it wasn't for the crazy Trump, it wouldn't have killed him. A normal, quote unquote, normal president would not have killed Soleimani. God riddance.
Mhm. So this is just a briefing about the Operation Cassandra. It was targeting Hezbollah's financial networks.
It was targeting Hezbollah's networks, and it proved that there's a highway that starts from Syria and Lebanon and goes all the way to the triangle, which is basically between Venezuela and Colombia and all of this.
Wow.
The Maduro regime used to supply them with diplomatic passports. These people used to run diamonds, drugs, gold, whatever you call it.
So that was one of their sources of income, the drug trafficking. What other sources of income did they have?
When the economy of Syria was sanctioned, the Caesar Act, they needed to find ways. So they used Lebanon, as many of the money we lost, many of our deposits were used to subsidize many products, gasoline, flour. You had these networks. They use the port, the Beirut port, they use it to smuggle stuff. They use the Tartus port. Anyone who's aware of Lebanon, if you are to, let's say, import Colgate toothbrush, okay, or toothpaste.
Yeah.
If you're living in the Biqa, usually it gets to the port and then it's driven up to the Biqa. During
Yeah.
the Assad regime, if you were sitting and monitoring the movement of trucks, you would find products who are getting from the Biqa to Beirut because Hezbollah had their access points in Tartus. They would get their stuff in, and then they would move them into Beirut. They ran the cell phone, smuggled cell phones, anything you want to, prostitution, gambling rings. They have a fatwa for everything. That because for them they have convinced their people that this we have to do this because ultimately God wills it, and that's how they operate.
Isn't that hypocritical to their Islamist
Of course,
views?
of course. Now, this is our problem with political Islam, be it in the Sunni environment or the Shiite environment or even any environment. These people have no ethics whatsoever. If they had ethics, we would not be having this conversation right now.
And
Wow.
how do I? It's a bit hard to believe that people are so willing to just agree with that. To just follow through with sayings like, yes, okay, they're doing it because this is what's God's will. We are Muslims, we
Right?
follow our faith, and then we
Very,
still do this.
very easy. Other communities in Lebanon do the same. If you're a Druze and listening to Ali Jumlat, you would say people don't have the ability to think outside their group. Even if you decide to not identify with your community, people around you cannot pick up on your wave. They don't understand what you're saying. The difference between all of these communities who justify corruption and even murder sometimes is that none of the other communities and their chiefs are connected to a regional project. So Wali Jumlat, Nabi Birri, Saad Haris, Amir Jaja, all of them might do this stuff or we're accusing, but they never put the interest of international actors over their own interest. So I'm a historian of the Civil War, and I studied the Maronites and the Druze. If you are to take Bashir Jmail and Wali Jumlat, one of them was an ally of Israel, and the other was an ally of the Soviet Union. None of these two warlords actually cared what the Soviet Union or Israel wanted. They fought it out for their own personal gains and their communities. It is not, if you are, for example, to study corruption in Lebanon, if you steal $1 million and you from a traditional feudal lord, this money is recycled into the system or it goes into a Swiss bank account. Hezbollah steals a couple of million and then it carries out a terrorist attack against a Jewish synagogue in Argentina. That's a big difference. That's why your clientelist system and Lebanon itself would be inviting sanctions and inviting violence on it. That's a major difference. And if people are not aware of this, I have a major problem with them.
Wow.
So what is people's problem in Lebanon when it comes to Hezbollah? Why are they so blind to the truth?
People got used to the idea of subsidizing. I always use this example. If you are living in Lebanon before the economic collapse, you were buying Italian pasta cheaper than Italy. You were buying American. I lived in DC. In Beirut, there were cheaper products because our currency was pegged to the dollar. They were operating this system and they continued operating it until it mutated. And I believe the mutation happened when we elected a president called Michel Aoun, because he was technically an ally of Hezbollah, and the international community, and more importantly, the Gulf, who was fighting in Yemen, looked and saw a kind of a hostile president. And the problem is that this hostile president came on the shoulders of an ally of the Gulf, Saad al-Hariri. This is why he paid for his political career with this. So I think the Lebanese, if you ask them now, none of them want to pay tax. None of them want to stand in line. They want to go back to the old system. I don't know if this is Lebanese or the Mediterranean weather. The Italians have a corrupt system, but they don't have militias running in the streets.
That's true.
I think what people would say is that look at Palestine, what happened to the West Bank and Gaza, and they're afraid of the same things happening in South Lebanon.
Yes, but no, I tell you, Ali, I had a friend who visited me. He lives in Dubai, but he grew up in Ramallah. We're having a drink in Ashrafi, and then the power cut. He told me, "You have power cuts?" This is a guy who grew up under occupation. He told me when his dad goes to hospital, he has to copay $50 when he has an open heart surgery. Isn't this tragic?
But is that the current situation now in Gaza? Because after the recent, like after the war that they've experienced and the genocide and the attacks, it's become more
Yes,
restrictive and
sorry, sorry.
more tighter.
True,
So I
but
don't know.
take a look at how long it took the Israelis to destroy the Gaza healthcare system. They had so much hospitals that the Israelis took like 6 months to level these hospitals. The reason why Gaza happened, we have to admit, was Sinwar. And Sinwar, at the end of the day, has the apocalyptic approach of the Iranians. Unfortunately for him, the Iranians were not genuine in joining the fight because he actually assumed, and many of the people assumed, that when the war starts, everyone will join. They kept on repeating a concept which blew up in their face called the unification of the fronts. Nasrallah did not join the fight. Nasrallah was playing footsie with the Israelis. And according to the Israeli chief of staff, if Nasrallah had actually gone to war, he would have occupied part of the Galil. This guy is not Hezbollah are not trained to fight the Israelis. They are trained to go into our houses like they did on the 7th of May in 2008. They are trained to kill our former Prime Minister, Rafi al-Hariri. I noticed a couple of months ago that when the anniversary of Hariri came up, there was the 25th anniversary or the 20th anniversary of the killing of Hariri. Anyone who was born after that does not remember the details. So I had to write about it. We have an international tribunal that implicated Hezbollah for killing a prime minister. And that's no minor detail here.
That's true. It's not a minor detail, and I believe it also made waves within the Lebanese population, especially when there was always rumors before the tribunal came out. You know, the final result came out. There's always rumors like who killed them. We don't know, but people always had like certain suspicions, and when the suspicions came true, I feel like a lot of people changed their perspective on Hezbollah, and they definitely lost support from then. Um, is that support like fading now? Is it consistently fading, and is it weakening Hezbollah's presence, especially in their
Hezbollah
fight
has
against Israel?
definitely has simply been weakened because before 2000, when the Israelis actually withdrew unilaterally, Hezbollah had not only cross-sectarian support. People who were smoking their shishas in Cairo were listening to Hassan Nasrallah. People who
Mm.
in everywhere in Morocco and he wasn't branded as a terrorist. On the contrary, I think after the killing of Hariri and after the way that Nasrallah convened his boys and thanked Syria for killing us, people changed. And more importantly, remember, we lost a lot of politicians. We lost Samir Asir. What I say
Yep.
usually, Samir Asir is a champion of the Syrian and the Palestinian cause. And George Howe, the former chairperson of the Communist Party, is a renowned figure for fighting Israel. They killed these two people.
Oof.
Forget that they killed Pierre Jmeil, who was a Kataib member, who they accuse him of being a Zionist, although he was not. They killed people who have credentials in fighting Israel. They, this is what they do. And because at the end of the day, I always say, guys, these people have a banner that has an AK-47 and its design. More importantly, when I was a kid, they had their brand was the Islamic Revolution in Lebanon. Now they have the Islamic Resistance in Lebanon. So they rebranded the title and not the actual brand.
I wanted to go back to a point about when you said that Hezbollah aren't prepared or trained to fight against the Israeli forces. Um, 2006 was one war to look at as potentially a sample. Um, it could have been like a Pyrrhic victory or potentially maybe an actual victory because Israel claimed that they have lost. But now, also in the current fight, there are reports showing that they are causing damage. Like for example, they destroyed, like 3 days ago, they destroyed 40 Merkava tanks in one day, and also,
according
and they're also
to them.
according to
Let's
the
put
the
it.
sources. Sorry.
The Israelis have 1,000 Merkava tanks. If we destroy all of them, this doesn't bring back the villages. There are more than 1,000 houses destroyed, and the problem is not their destruction.
True.
No one will rebuild them now.
True.
So it's not the idea if you can actually shoot. Yes, they can still shoot at the Israelis, but so what? The Hezbollah people keep on saying that the Jews are cowards, the Jews are gay and all homosexuals and stuff. That's not true. We saw how these people fight, and more importantly, the people who are going to fight will not lose public support. They are still using an old playbook. In 1982, Sabra and Shatila turned the Israeli public opinion. Now the public opinion after October 7 is never again. This is the new Holocaust that was put in on October 7th. It doesn't justify Israeli violence, but it also invites us to understand the region around us. Look what's happening with the attack of the Gulf. And this is something I also invite our audience to try to answer. Why did Iran target Oman? Oman was doing all of it can to avoid the war. Even the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia publicly was messaging that we don't want the war because the war will get us to where we are right now. Why are you more interested than destroying the Khalifa Tower than shooting at Tel Aviv? All of these are legitimate questions we are entitled to answers from the so-called resistance.
And what do you think is what's the reasoning for them there? Like, why are they targeting
IRGC, they are fueled by a movement called Ash-Sha'ubiyya, which is anti-Arab sentiment. For them, we are slaves. We are expendable. And for them, their own people is expendable. Remember, Said, before the war, the IRGC and their hoodlums killed over 40,000 demonstrators using hunting rifles. I asked one of my Iranian students, why aren't your friends protesting against Iran during the war? Italy professor, they are waiting for us on the streets with orders to kill us. So if we don't get killed by an Israeli or US missile, the Pasdaran will shoot us. And obviously no one wants to die.
And so this concept of the Iranian regime potentially helping or looking out for Lebanon is farce, in your
Well,
opinion.
if this is the way they watch out for us, I wouldn't like to know how they would dislike us, because I don't think that this is the way forward. For them, they've done this over and over again. And they did this to the people of Syria, they did this to the people of Iraq. However, the people of Iraq and the people of Syria fought back. In the case of Lebanon, we always try to find ways to normalize Iran and their goons.
And speaking of normalization, do you see a future where Lebanon and Israel actually normalize their ties between each other? Do we follow
At the
suit
end
as
of
the
the
Gulf?
day, if you are going to war, there should be peace. The reason why you carry arms and you fight is for a better life. If your only reason is fighting for the sake of fighting, that's not the way going forward. And more importantly, I don't think that we actually need to use the word normalization. In order to live in peace, the entirety of the Lebanese South and the Shiites don't have pictures of their babies if they were born, if they were not digitized. These people have no baby books. People don't have the first locket of hair. They don't have the first, because this is the fifth time, Saeed, they've been displaced. The brand which the Hezbollah and Amal try to impose on the Shiites as a nation in agony and nation in sadness, that's absurd. This should not be allowed. And if it takes us a peace deal with Israel, and I don't care about Israel side, I care about peace with Cyprus, peace with Syria. At the moment, Hezbollah decided to launch drones from Beirut to Cyprus. If they have a
Yeah.
problem with nude beaches, just don't go there. You don't run drugs and you don't try to topple the government in Syria and then expect them to be nice to you. You know, why haven't we established proper diplomatic relations with the new Syrian regime? So I wouldn't actually worry about only peace with Israel. First of all, we don't have internal peace. We don't have regional peace. And again, anyone who has a Lebanese passport is now under suspicion of having a fake passport because of what they did to us.
Yeah.
So all of these are stuff. So normalization is used to frame peace as something bad. Peace is never bad. Being alive is not bad. Being killed or or dying because you don't have medication because you're surrounded by the Israelis and Hezbollah, that's normalization with death.
And
You know,
yeah, go ahead,
Lebanon
Doctor.
has a long history of wars and fighting and infighting, and but the guns are way too big now, and the destruction's way too massive. I don't think fighting is the answer right now. I don't. I totally agree that we need to.
I always keep hearing this. Yesterday in the demonstration, someone was explaining Israel doesn't understand only the language of violence. The Israelis are very versed in violence. You are the people that don't know how to use violence properly. The Israelis perfected the art of killing.
Hmm.
Never repeat this. This is an invitation to our death.
Right, especially after like the Dahi doctrine, and we
True.
saw that they don't care about civilians. Their strategy is to cause us to suffer and bleed, regardless of actual battles between soldiers. So why would we invite that again?
Not only that, forget the killing part. Why would I have to transition online for students? We are losing a
Mm.
lot of time. Second, we got to a point, Ali, where the Iranian Revolutionary Guard wanted to target EUB, an institution that has been
I know,
around
right?
for the last 160 years. We are in the top 100 of American universities, including in the US. That's how good we are. For them, their justification is because Israel and the US killed an innocent person in Tehran, they should kill an innocent person in Beirut. If I was religious, this would cause a big problem for me. How could someone justify the killing of the innocent to get back at the killing of someone who's also innocent? That goes against human logic.
Wow. How has Lebanon survived this far? I mean, there's been so many civil wars, so much infighting throughout the thousands of years of history of Lebanon. How are we still together, and how do we use those lessons to move forward?
Because the Lebanese, Ali, are very decent people. They're very resilience here is a curse, but it's good for us. Second, that's how we are brought up. We are the generation, the younger generation, doesn't have the same resilience because for a long period of time they lived in relative peace, so to
Hmm.
speak. But again, we cannot measure the trauma and the emotional scars. We are talking about a completely different. Because first of all, in the 80s, when I was growing up, I never knew that Lego existed. I used to play stupid. Now people are exposed. People see how people live in LA, how people live in Syria, even. So you are depriving them of a better life. The Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, gives you life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And if this is not given to you, you are justifiable in using arms to topple the government. I am losing property and I'm using my life. And I cannot pursue happiness because happiness does not come at the tip of a sword. I'm genuinely not angry. I'm really frustrated out of this.
This frustration is definitely exhibited within the Lebanese population, especially the ones that not within the Shiite sect, because it's clear, like now the outrage is even louder than before. You know, you have all of the Maronites and the Sunnis and the Druze now, they're going public about their disagreement with Hezbollah. And do you feel like there might be a bit of a unification of those sects against Hezbollah's presence?
The silver bullet to get Hezbollah, figuratively, is not to fight them as sects. If you are to use this logic, this only enforces Hezbollah's own logic of defending the Shiites.
Mm-hmm.
So you cannot
Wow.
use sectarian terms to fight them. The only way it's like the kryptonite here to defeat them is not to engage them in sectarian talk. And this is very important. And I wasn't just saying this. The President of the Republic and of all politicians should empower the Lebanese Shiites by treating them as Lebanese.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And again, we shouldn't indulge them in fantasies. For example, I wouldn't call them displaced. They are permanent refugees until Hezbollah disarms. Tough love works. If a lot of my students come to me in regular circumstances and they ask for extensions. I told them there's called deadlines for a reason. We are here to train you to become better people. We have to practice tough love. And tough love doesn't come from personal initiatives. It comes from the Constitution. The Constitution in Lebanon is a piece of paper that no one reads, no one cherishes. And that's a big problem.
But is tough love the right way to treat someone who's basically losing everything at the moment? Like, isn't it maybe a bit extreme in these circumstances?
Well, not really, because again, you have to cuddle them, but at the same time, you have to tell them the right things. And we've done the other ways of bullshitting them and telling them what they wanted to hear. And this is the fifth time they have been displaced. I come from a community that is very much grounded in its history and its land. I'm a Druze, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that Walid Jumlat would ever put the community, or the community would ever allow Walid Jumlat to put it in existential danger? No, because there's, for some reason, the exposure of the Shiites to this quackery, okay, has diffused the safety valve. There's something happening on the these people react. I heard this one idiot, sorry to use this term, he wanted the Iranians to bomb Dimona, the nuclear reactor in Israel. This guy lives in the Lebanese south. Do you know what will happen to if there's a nuclear explosion? How could I indulge with these people other than kicking their ass with a
Right.
with
And they're supposedly pro-Palestinian too. So what do
Of
you think
course.
is throwing?
Many Lebanese, they like the Palestinian cause, but they hate the Palestinians. Lebanon can serve the Palestinians much better if it has a healthy educational system and a healthcare system. Ghassan Abu Sitta, the brave surgeon, has been operating on kids from Gaza because of the American University of Beirut, not because of the health system that Hezbollah established. All of these are facts which people need to listen to.
I have a question about the future of Lebanon, and now that the youth is a lot less religious than maybe you could say the older generations, how does that change the dynamic, since Lebanon is a sectarian political system, the religion and
Well, actually, there's a magic. There's a golden hour here because many people or the cult leaders are either dying out or they're no longer impressive, and none of the young generation actually wants to graduate school and work in government because no one wants to get paid $200 a month, right? So what will happen right now, if we are to provide them with an alternative, these people will become citizens. But if we are just trying to shun them out, what the politicians do, Ali, in Lebanon, they just force you to migrate. And that's actually a crime. That's a kind of a war crime in my book. So I think we have the chance with the generation, but it needs a kind of a purging ritual. It will take at least 10 years for this system to change if we are not allowing it. I always use this example. If you have, let's say, a problem with your lungs and you're a chain smoker, you cannot keep on smoking and then expect to be better, right? So
Right.
that's a very important thing we need to remind ourselves. We need to cut doing these toxic initiatives for us to become better.
So, just to continue, and apologies for the small disconnection. There's a power outage apparently in California.
Oh,
That was very unexpected. I just received a message from Ali. But to ask a question about on that topic, um, okay, sorry, that kind of took me
No
kind of off.
worries, no
Did
worries. It
not
happens.
expect a power outage in the US. um, so if you could just repeat the last point that was mentioned.
So
Uh,
continued exposure to the youth of Lebanon to all of these toxic elements would
yes, the
only
purge.
allow for the current incubator to give us young men and women who are simply too angry and they will just leave. Or if they don't leave, they will not develop into productive young men and women. So the only way for us to go forward is to stop the toxicity of the system itself, and it takes time. If you need to desalinize the soil, it takes time. You cannot plant a second day. The
Right.
way forward
Exactly.
is to change the Lebanese political system from a sectarian system to whatever we want. People talk about federalism, talk about even partition. Still, partition and federalism is a system, and a
Right.
system requires a gravitational pull. Someone has to be the gravity. The state has to exist for all of our fantasies to come true.
So what's a realistic solution? Because like you said, people have shared the concept of federalism. I remember back when I was in AUB in my political science course, one person once stood up and said, "Why do I have to follow such a system? Why can't I just have my daya, my baladi, my village basically, and the municipality and my church just follow that, and they be
Well,
running the
yes,
trade."
yes, I'm
So
not
what's
against this, and I believe this is a way forward. Decentralization and federalism is a way forward.
Mhm.
However, you cannot be living in Ashut and then the people of Kfar Kila are not doing well. You're in the same country. It doesn't work like that. And
Exactly.
more importantly, when it comes to the main issue, there's only one way forward. We have to disarm Hezbollah. To quote Cato the Elder, cartridge must be destroyed. Cartridge must be abolished. We cannot have people on our gates, UB gates and Lebanon's gates, asking for our death and then expect us to survive. It doesn't work like that.
That's true. Yes, the constant risk of war creates an unnecessary like stress factor that completely takes you off of your path and your focus. But for specifically for the youth, how what's the right way to maybe not necessarily shield them, but show them down the right path so that they do not fall into the old ways and take Lebanon into a better future.
Well, I do this in my classes and I do this in my public appearances. You
Hmm.
always shouldn't take anything as presented to you. You should always be analytical. You should never treat anything as sacred when it comes to politics and to public opinion. You should always try to deconstruct it and to challenge it. And when you know someone is bullying you, you have to stand up to them. We have to create a public opinion, even within our communities. And more importantly, I do invite the young people to indulge in parties. We cannot have a political system without normal political parties in Lebanon. This is why many of them decided that to move away from political parties, they should go to their own political parties and try to reform them. And that's something we cannot avoid.
When you say reform their own political parties, as in the parties that they grew up with, maybe
Grow up with
the
their parents' parties, and again, they cannot go and say كلهم يعني كلهم, all of them means all of them. No, everyone has to pay according to their own contribution to the demise of the country. I would
Mhm.
never put Hezbollah on the same level as the rest because no one in the history of Lebanon have made us pay as Hezbollah did because they're not part of the country. They might have Lebanese in their midst, but their agenda was never Lebanese, and this would never change.
So something I wanted to go about more about the youth is you've written about and done research about the youth back in during the Civil War or even before the Civil War. Remember one of your articles was talking about the youth from 1967 to 1975 within AUB specifically. What has changed, do you think, from opinions back then to opinions now? How are they? How are they shaped within the political system? What's their outlook? What
Well,
can you share
back
about
in
that?
the 60s and the 70s, there were these grand doctrines and ideologies. You had a bipolar world. Now it's different. But the people who grew up, the new left, the people who were demonstrating in the streets of Beirut and then decided to use violence, grew up
Hmm.
in the war and later changed Lebanon for the better. In the 90s, many of them started preaching against violence. So the only way for us to progress is to go through the cycle, be it positive or negative here. So I think that we have to create a political system or an economic system that is sustainable
Okay.
because again and nothing can come out of Lebanon without a proper judiciary. If we don't have a proper judiciary, all of the words coming out of my mouth would be wishful thinking.
Yes, true. You need to have the proper systems that just actually executing on their work and doing the right thing.
True.
Um, I wanted to go a bit more into the history of Lebanon, continued, and more the roots of our people. You know, who were the first Lebanese, and also something that's constantly debated is how some Lebanese. There's a group within the Lebanese people that claim to be Phoenicians. Where does that stem from? Is there any truth to it, and
Well, to
why
say
are we like that?
there's definitely truth to the Phoenicians and definitely truth of the very solid connection between the Lebanese and the Phoenicians. But if you decide not to identify with the Phoenicians, it doesn't mean that you're not Lebanese. It means
Okay.
that you decided not to be part of this group. And my students are different because back in the 70s, if you would call a Muslim a Phoenician, they would beat you up, just like if you would call a Maronite from Sirwan an Arab. Now these identities are very fluid, and we are part of a mixture of all of this. I would not dismiss the Phoenician legacy, but also I would warn, as a historian and as an author of a book called Conflict on Mount Lebanon, Collective Identities and the War of the Mountains between the Maronites and the Druze, weaponizing identity and weaponizing collective identity is extremely dangerous. So if you were
Mm-hmm.
a Phoenician or if you were an Arab or if you were a Norwegian, doesn't change much. If you pay your tax, I grew up with a lot of Palestinians, which I consider to be more Lebanese than I am, because many of them have Lebanese moms. Why aren't these people entitled to? Why, as a Lebanese who went to Georgetown, for example, I could talk to a white boy in Virginia and tell him we, as Americans, and he would not challenge me because I've decided to belong to this club. I do understand many people, and more importantly, it's a good thing to fight over history, but also it's very good not to fight over our future. I would like to live in peace in the future. And second, I always tell them never take history too seriously to transform history into a fight. I was trained by the best. I was trained by Kamal Salibi and Abdurrahim Abu Hussein. Our job as scholars is to debunk myth and to simply invite a dialogue. I have a lot of friends which disagree with me over history. We can have a civilized discussion. None of them accuse me of being a Zionist or they want to shoot me for an article I wrote.
And that's actually good. Like when you have that between scholars to be able to have disagreements on history and then not publicly accuse each other of labels and stuff. Because for example, and last time we had a journalist who was anti-Iranian regime. We got labeled as Zionists in the comments. So
That's fine. If you
it's
don't get labeled as a Zionist, there's something wrong.
Welcome to the club.
My
Get out of
problem
here.
is, and I think Ali understands this because he's living in the States, this wokeness about us dying for someone who's in a Starbucks sipping on his latte and wanting me to die for Iran. What's up with you guys? Why would I invite someone who has an American accent who belongs to a neo-Nazi party cheering Your parents sent you to Colombia because they can afford it. When someone like Norm Finkelstein tells you don't chant from the river to the sea, listen to him. Don't carry a flag of a militia that killed your US Marines in 1982. That's stupid. Don't do that. If you care about the Palestinians, if you care about us brown people, stop supporting the people who are killing us. And the people who are killing us are not only the Israelis.
Oof. So we can work on disarming Hezbollah, but can you really kill an idea like that? I mean, Lebanon's the land of the phoenix. You kill one thing, another thing comes up.
Okay, Ali, let me tell you about an ancient ritual that used to be in Arabia. It's called burying girls. If you were an Arab Bedouin and you got a girl, it would be shameful to keep her. They would go and they would bury her in the desert. These were ideas that were mainstream back then. Does anyone still do this? So my example is that these ideas, if you keep on preaching them and they're bad for you, they will continue. We need to stand up. We need to speak out. We need to use logic. It's not easy. It's not easy at all. It's more hard than manual labor. You can move a mountain easier than convincing someone that he's wrong in Lebanon. Yet we are doing it.
So we've mentioned obviously the disarmament of Hezbollah multiple times on the podcast, and it's a current topic in Lebanon. But what does it look like for Lebanon once that does happen? Can we trust Israel to keep their word, because we know that they're not trustworthy?
No, you can't.
No way.
You cannot do this. But I would assure you that if we don't have the same Iranian arsenal in the south of Lebanon, no one would be able to justify a full-scale land invasion that would get to Beirut. The destruction that would happen to you would include shooting a shepherd, unfortunately, or bombing a house. And more importantly, we've bet and we've wagered on weapons, right? And it got us nowhere. So it's a much better wager on peace. And again, it's not true that everyone looks like Netanyahu in Israel. We have people that want peace as equally as we do. And remember one thing, Netanyahu was going to jail before Sinwar and his peeps bailed him out. Today I was listening that he was begging, Netanyahu was begging the prosecutor to postpone his hearing. They are still taking him to court when the country is at war. And you want us to beat Israel with a Coptagon barrel bomb throwing hoodlums? And خلاص يعني حيكفر يا شباب.
So you're saying that actually peace would lead to them fixing
it themselves? Not only that, I believe that Lebanon has a better chance of competing with the Israelis in prosperity rather than war. We are a more potent nation of scholars and doctors, and people like us more. The Arab Gulf prefer Lebanese over Israelis. They like us. Their ancestors and their kids are trained in Lebanon. They like us more. First of all, we have the language connection. That's enough. We have better food. We can win. I'm willing to take our best falafel in Lebanon is called Sahyun, Zionist. We can defeat them with the hummus. They might take us with the schnitzel and these stuff because they are European. But definitely, I would take our cooks over the Breaking Bad militia of Hezbollah.
I agree.
Me too. I agree. Well said.
The winner.
Okay. So the main issue that still is, what about the Shiite population that do support Hezbollah still? How do we get them on board?
I told you, first of all, messaging has to be different. Second, you have to tell them simply, if you continue to do this, you are breaking away from Lebanon, and we will not try to find a justification for you. That's very easy to do if you are consistent. The problem that, first of all, we abuse them not only by giving them as subjects to Hezbollah, but also giving them to Nabih Berri. Someone who's been in power since 1992 has, in a way, endangered the whole system. We need to fight this system. And we are fighting it, but again, it takes time. You cannot finish this fight, and the Israelis cannot win this fight for you. Even if they get rid of Hezbollah, you need to clean up after that, if we are to use it figuratively.
Wow.
Is there a legal way of removing our current leaders that would work?
Well, the Grim Reaper will do this because most of them are.
I mean, yes, that's definitely what we've been waiting for. But
That's what my concept is, that young men and women should go into these parties and hijack
Reform.
them in a good way.
Yeah.
We had like I was a student leader in the 2005 demonstrations. We were ready. We had the cadres. We had the messaging. We never had the technology we had right now. So it's more lethal now. So
Yeah, true.
my students are smarter than we were. At least they have better use of technology. But again, I don't want them to die. I don't want them to go and pick up weapons. It doesn't work like that.
Well, that's the thing that also like stops a lot of people from going into their political parties with different ideas and with concepts of reform, because they can easily be ostracized, they can easily be eliminated, or even just killed, or they get
No,
scared and jailed. So
again,
it's like there's so many things that stop them from actually like there's too many obstructions. It's not easy. And even if you do make it some sort
I
of
was
change,
invited
it's
a
a very
couple of
small change.
a couple of years ago. I was invited to Germany to the 50th anniversary of their basic law. Their basic law was crafted in a way after 1945 never to allow human rights to be violated. And this is very important. That's why they're always very much weary about right-wing parties winning, because right-wing parties don't really respect human rights. So we need to implant this, and we need to teach by example. You need to send people to jail for jaywalking, for tax. In Lebanon, if you don't pay your taxes, you are branded as a smart one. If you do pay your taxes, they say, "Oh, it's a pity. This guy is a simpleton. He pays their tax." Never ever tell your kids not to be good. I was brought up as a Boy Scout, and I still live I do have a lot of vices, but still, I try as much as possible to remember what I was taught.
So, Ali, what?
I mean, incredible podcast. I totally agree that the way forward is actually having these discussions, right? Where we don't necessarily all agree on every single thing, but talking it out and reaching, some kind of conclusions that we can.
I don't know
all
if
together on.
you've read Kamal Salibi's House of Many Mansions. It's a very important book on the history of Lebanon. I invite you to do so, and so the audience. Salibi used this example that Lebanon is like a house. When I was growing up, I liked the NBA. I used to put pictures of NBA players over my bed. My brother used to watch soccer and football. Everyone decorates their own room like they want, but when you're in the living room, everyone has to share. That's why the structure of the house is important, and the division of the rooms are important. It doesn't mean that all of us, like for example, now you're wearing a tie, we're not. Doesn't mean that if we're not wearing a tie, we're not in proper attire. As long as we are respecting the house rules, we are still part of Lebanon. And anyone who wishes not to be part of this house can simply leave.
Well said.
That's very, very well said. That's a very fair point as well. Dr. Rabah, thank you for joining us on this podcast. Thank you for sharing your great insight.
It's a great pleasure.
We wanted to ask did you have any final words for our audience and for the Lebanese people right now? What would you share with them?
Well, I would like to share with them that we are definitely at a very important juncture in the history of Lebanon. Try as much as possible as to remember that sometimes we do exchange fiery comments. Every one of us cares about Lebanon in their own way. But at the end of the day, nothing is worth us going to war and dying for nothing. I would like us to live in peace, peace with ourselves, and more importantly, remember that no one can protect Lebanon except the Lebanese. No army can do anything except if it has legitimacy to do so. And more importantly, if you avoid the beast, it will come to you. If you don't stand up to justice, accountability, and the ending of impunity, if you're having a lemonade on the 4th of August in your apartment in Ashrafiyya, death will come knocking. Even if you don't live in the Lebanese South, no one is safe, not here, not in the US, if you're Lebanese, if your home is not in order. That's very important to remember.
Thank you for that. Guys, thank you for watching another episode of A2 The Show. We'll see you next time. Peace.